Okay, well, hi to everybody. I'm not sure if you are on my last, all of you are on my last talk or not. I recognize some people and names. So welcome back, or hello to the new people. So I am Nore Hoogstad and I am the owner of Gutsy by Nutrition. And today's talk, first one was on Gut 101, which is still available on YouTube, etc. And this time I'm going to be talking about pre, and postbiotics. Which are pretty much the keys to gut health and critical to our general health as well. So I just want to tell you a little bit first about functional nutritional therapy, which is what I do at Gutsy by Nutrition. So I basically use food as medicine. So strategic use of nutrients and supplements, including food, but also supplements that are generally nutraceuticals, so based in food, which our body uses easier to create cell balance, and cells being the basis of our human life, who we are. And what I do is functional. You probably, most of you know about this, and you might have seen functional or integrative health professionals, but seeing the body as interconnected, looking at imbalances rather than disease, dealing with the root cause, not just the symptoms. Obviously, if we have symptoms, we need to deal with them, but trying to get underneath what's causing them, preventing disease. So taking a long view and looking at preventing disease if we can, looking at health as optimal wellness rather than the absence of disease, which I think is important nowadays because our new normal is not necessarily that healthy. It's holistic, so mind, body, looking at the body, the interactions between everything that we are, who we are, and systemic, so looking at the body as whole and the interaction of the parts rather than just different pieces of the body that don't relate to the others. So that's kind of, I wanted to tell you that because that's where I'm coming from in terms of this talk and the other talk too. Just very quickly, most of you would have seen this last time, so I'm a functional nutritional therapist. I'm an integrative health coach and also a transformation coach, so that's the mind part of what I do, which can help people when they have perhaps limiting beliefs or behaviours or habits that they want to change. I also do a whole lot of lab testing. I trained with Tom O'Brien on the ins and outs of gluten, how to get off gluten properly, what it involves to heal someone from celiac disease, because just getting off gluten isn't enough. I had Sears myself, so I'm across Mould. I've done Sandeep Gupta's Mould Illness Made Simple course, which is great, and I help quite a few people with Sears. Yoga, I'm a yoga teacher as well. That's sort of how I got into things, and done a whole lot of other courses, and I'm continuously learning. I'm a bit of an addict. But I basically got here because of my own health problems, which is how I got to meet Peter. And yeah, it's a work in progress, as many of us know, when we've been chronically ill or are chronically ill, is uncovering the layers of the onion. All right, so the digestive system, you might recognize this picture from last time. It is it starts in our mouth, but actually it starts in our brain, because we need to be in a rest and digest mode in order for the right processes and juices to be triggered. Then we chew our food, and we have things that come into our mouth to help us break down carbs there. Then the food travels down our esophagus into our stomach. It's broken down there. It enters the small intestine, where in the stomach proteins are broken down. Enters the small intestine, where fats are broken down, emulsified, so that our body can use them. Other nutrients are further broken down. In the small intestine, that's where the absorption happens. And then what remains goes through our ileocecal valve into our large intestine, which is where our gut bacteria live, which is largely what we're going to be speaking about today. Where recycling happens in the body, things like water and certain nutrients that we might need that our body thought we didn't need. So it will cleave them off and then reuse them, sometimes mistakenly, which can cause problems. sometimes not, and where a number of vitamins like B vitamins, A, E, D, K are made as well. So you would recognize this from last time, and this is, I love this, all disease begins in the gut. So Hippocrates said this all those thousands of years ago, and he had a practice where he did treat gut health, recognizing how critical it is to general health. I always sort of call the gut the command and control center. Not to say that everything happens there, but a lot happens there. And put it this way, if things aren't right in the gut, then trying to heal other parts of the body are going to be much more challenging. So as I talked about last week, I focused a lot on the physiological and biochemical aspects further north in our body. So all those processes I was talking about of chewing, about being in the right mode, in a parasympathetic or rest and digest mode. And people often focus on the microbiome, on our gut flora, but without fixing the things further north. That's not going to happen because our food won't be broken down properly necessarily, causing all sorts of further south or downstream issues. But today we are going to focus not on those physiological or biochemical aspects, but looking more at the microbiome. So I had a great analogy the other day, and you might have heard it already, about, you know, our body being an ecosystem. So it's like a garden, and when we have the wrong plants in there, or we put chemicals in there, or we've disturbed that sort of balance of nature in our garden, then the weeds are going to come up and grow, and those weeds are a sign of imbalance. So we need to try and restore balance in order for those weeds, which are always there, but to be sort of contained and not allowed to overtake the system. So I really love that analogy of us being a garden. And also, speaking a bit more broadly, we are part of a broader system, not just the ecosystem of our body, but how we connect with the rest of our environment, which is what happens through our gut. It's how we, if you like, I think I talked about this last time, we adapt and take in our environment through our food, through what we breathe, and also our minds as well, of course. I thought you just might be interested in, because there's a bit of confusion about this, and I'd like to remind myself as well, there is a difference between, you might hear people talking about microbiome or the microbiota. So the microbiome is the habitat of organisms. It includes all the bacteria, archaea, lower and high eukaryotes, we don't worry about what those are, viruses and their genes, so it includes the genetics as well, plus the surrounding environmental conditions, whereas the microbiota is the microorganisms present in a defined environment. So we talk about the microbiota of the whole body, and we talk about, for example, a microbiome in our gut, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. So just to remind you what the colon is, where our gut flora largely live, the small intestine being in being a generally sterile environment, and our large intestine being where our microbiome or our gut flora live. So what happens in the colon? It is, as I said, the home of our gut flora, and as I said, we make nutrients there. We also do absorb other nutrients that we haven't utilized until then. We recycle nutrients, as I said. We also have some immunity there. In general, our gut houses 70 to 80% of our immunity, and where we expel waste, which we don't like to talk about necessarily, but we know about how unpleasant it is if that's not functioning properly, and how important it is to our general health. Because if we don't have that working properly, then we can reabsorb toxins that our body is actually trying to get rid of. Why does our microbiome matter? Our microbiome is now thought of by experts as an organ. It's around 1 kilo up to 2 kilos, depending on your size and weight. So it's a significant part of our body. You can also see this by the size of, and there is debate around this, but it's estimated that we have about 30 trillion microbes in our body. It acts as our second genome or DNA. So we have co-evolved, and scientists think that we have advanced intelligence-wise because of our co-relationship with our microbiome. And in actual fact, we have fewer genes than a nematode worm. So that is how dependent we are on this genome. And some people are talking about the death of the microbiome. There's a famous research paper about that, evidencing how in America, people have 10% of their gut flora than they used to have 100 to 200 years ago. And that is one of the factors that is contributing to significant health problems and chronic disease especially. So these bacteria connect us with our outside world. They reflect what is in our environment. They reflect our family, our house, the air around us. They reflect the way we were born. They reflect what we were if we were breastfed or not, whether our mother, the state of her health and her microbiota. We now know that a lot of this is passed on while we're in the womb, which before we thought babies were born with a relatively sterile microbiome, but we know that's not the case now. So there is debate around this. People say up to 70%, but the most reliable figure I could come up with that I felt was safe, that our cells are over half non-human, which is quite mind-boggling when you first hear that. So the other point is, the greater this diversity and the more diverse we have, and it is competitive. We only have a limited amount of space for gut flora, but the more diversity there, the better our health. That's what research shows. And you may know already, but we don't just have a microbiome in our gut. We have a brain microbiome, we have it in our lungs, on our skin. The evidence about skin microbiome and the impact of that on our health is starting to really come forth, and that's quite amazing, because the average amount of chemicals we put on our skin per day is something like 60 to 70. So when you think about that and what that is doing to our skin microbiome, and that is absorbed into our bloodstream, there are implications for that too. But yeah, the body is amazing. So basically we have bacteria all through our body that we rely on, or that can go wrong as well, of course. Yeah, and as I said, 50% of our vitamin K and folate, vitamin B9 and B vitamins are made in our colon, in our large intestine. And if you know anything about nerve health and general health and immunity, those are really important. And then it's also where our body depends on a healthy gut microbiome to be able to utilize fats and make fat-soluble vitamins A, E, D, and K. And they are very important for our immunity and general health as well. There are actually 4 kinds of biotics. And we generally only hear a lot about probiotics, but somewhat about prebiotics. So probiotics are healthy bacteria we can take as supplements or have in our guts. Prebiotics are the plant fiber that our gut bacteria need as fuel. And then postbiotics, these are the byproducts or metabolites created by our gut flora, the bacteria in our gut, as they digest these fibers that our body can't use, that then just go through to the colon. And they're called short chain fatty acids, which are actually a saturated fat, and our body loves them. But there's another one that is also can be made, another kind of postbiotic. There are more, but these are the 2 main ones. So short chain fatty acids, and you may have heard of LPS or lipopolysaccharides. They're an inflammatory compound, unlike short chain fatty acids, which are a healthy and anti-inflammatory one. And I'll talk a lot more about them in a minute. but the LPS are inflammatory, and they are created by an imbalanced microbiome. So bacteria where there are those weeds in the garden are starting to take over and cause problems. And some of those can be quite toxic. If you have severe LPS high levels, it can create something called endotoxemia, which is a really destructive disease or condition. And actually, I've seen pictures of the cells in the gut lining where someone has endotoxemia, and it's not just about those gaps in the cells sort of being pulled apart or damaged, but it's about them being eaten away. So it's really quite serious. And they have an influence on our brain function, because there's a very close relationship between our gut and brain, which I talked about last time. So if you have endotoxemia or too many LPS in your gut, it affects your brain health significantly as well. And then we have a fourth one, which is an emerging field. And I'm not going to focus on this so much today because it is emerging and there's so much else to talk about in the other areas, which is something that we can actively do focus on to improve our health and the state of our gut flora. And these are natural metabolites produced by the fermentation process of specific probiotic strains. So it's something that has been discovered in labs when they've isolated certain cultures from probiotic bacteria. And they are thought to maybe account for some of the benefits of probiotics. So this is a possible form of therapeutic treatment that we might sort of see in the future. I love this picture. This is a picture of the human intestine and the villi. So the human intestine, if you see those little bumps there, the human intestine is incredibly long. It's something like the length of a tennis court. I can't quite remember, but it's incredibly long. And then in order to absorb better, we have these things, these little finger-like protrusions called villi, which expand the area of our small intestine, recognizing how critical it is for us to absorb nutrients there. So you can see how critical they are and how critical they are to gut health. And in someone with celiac disease, you will see these flattened. With advanced celiac disease, you will see these flattened, whereas you don't see that with non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So that's one of the key differences in those two conditions. And they can both be quite serious, but flattened villi, obviously you can't absorb as much. So that's one of the problems with having celiac disease. So why does gut flora matter? It impacts our immunity. So our gut, as I said, is where 80%, so most of our immunity lies, the production of those vitamins. So how we digest and use food, in other words, our own metabolism. Obesity, so different gut bacteria, and it's a bit chicken and egg, which came first, but can affect our weight. And it's particularly when you look at the balances of the two larger families of bacteria, that's important. We have two families, and if one is higher, it tends to be linked with obesity. If the other is higher, those people generally are not obese. And there's an experiment where with mice, they took the healthy bacteria of a slim mouse, put it in an obese mouse, and that obese mouse got slim, and vice versa. They made a mouse obese, did a fecal transplant into a skinny healthy mouse, and it became obese. So that's a really vivid example of how critical our gut bacteria can be to our weight. And then of course there are health implications as well. Inflammation, I talked a little bit about that already with the LPS, but if we have inflammation in our gut, it becomes systemic, so across all of our systems in our body. And there's quite a lot of research on autism as well, so there is a link with a low diversity of gut bacteria and autism, and I'm sure we'll find out more about that in the future. So basically, with our gut flora, imbalances, which are called infections, but I like to call them imbalances because we used to think we had to kill a lot of the bad bugs off, the bad gut flora or overgrowths off. But now sometimes we still have to do that, but now we talk more about supporting that diversity. But so reducing those imbalances by really promoting good bacteria. So those imbalances, infections, and I mentioned LPS before, can usually mean inflammation and disease. Prebiotics and postbiotics. So these are just a few prebiotic and post-prebiotic foods, and I'll talk more about them. So a little bit more detail on what prebiotics are. They are a molecule selectively used by a host microorganism that confers a health benefit. Basically, they're plant fibers that our body can't use or digest. We can't break them down, but our gut bacteria love them. They ferment them and they feed off them. And in doing so, they confer health benefits to us. So there are different types of prebiotics, and it's really interesting when you look at which gut bugs like what kind of prebiotics. So basically it's good to eat a diversity of them. We have resistant oligosaccharides, so onion, garlic, wheat and rye. And I wouldn't recommend eating anything with gliadin or gluten if you're, at a stage of healing, or trying to heal your gut. Resistant starch, so that's things like green bananas, but they have to be cold. So if you get green banana flour, which you can do and it's great for cooking with, unfortunately when you cook it you do destroy it. So you can do things like sprinkle that on your coconut yogurt or whatever. Oats, cooked and cooled rice and potatoes. And I think somebody asked me a question last time about whether it was okay to warm them up. I have done some research on that, and basically there's a bit of thinking that slightly warming up can improve that the amount of resistant starch, but most of the research shows that it's best kept cold. So you can mix it up a bit, but I just wanted to answer that question. Phytochemicals, yes, so fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and legumes they are found in, and non-starchy polysaccharides, so we see some of the same things: oats, apples, plums, wheat and barley. If you're looking for this in food that you want to buy at, when you're out sort of shopping, so they're often labelled as these things. I thought that might be helpful. So galacto-oligosaccharides, fructo-oligosaccharides, oligofructose, chicory fibre and inulin. So just to explain how prebiotics benefit us. So we eat food and the prebiotics or the fibre feed our gut flora, which make short chain fatty acids, which are those postbiotics, which benefit our body. So I wanted to go in a bit more depth about short chain fatty acids because they are so important to our health, and they've sort of become an increasingly important focus in my practice. The more I learn about them, the more I support people with their health. So they, as I said, they're mainly produced in our large intestine, but they are also produced in our liver and other parts of our body, but mostly in our large intestine. There are three main types, and they are all saturated fats: butyrate, which you might have heard of, acetate and propionate. And together these three short chain fatty acids make up 95% of the short chain fatty acids in our large intestine. There is also valerate and some others which make up the remaining 5%. And currently the thinking is that the ratio should be 16 to 60 to 24% of those three short chain fatty acids. So yeah, they are produced by, as I said, by gut bacteria when they ferment those undigestible fibers. And what are the benefits of short-chain fatty acids? Well, as you can see, it's quite a long list. They nourish our gut lining, so that we have a one cell layer between that forms our gut lining, and that is a mucosal sort of lining. And so they nourish that, and that's really important to the health of our gut and the general health of our body, because when that's damaged, it can things can happen on the other side in our bloodstream, which we don't want. Things can get through and those sorts of things. They improve our level of nutrient absorption. They prevent permeability, or what we call leakiness. They help regulate the pH, so the acid-alkaline balance in our large intestine, which is important because when we have dysregulation there, if we're too acidic or too alkaline, that is one link or cause of disease. They inhibit the bacterial overgrowths that I've already talked about, these imbalances. They bind to proteins, promoting blood flow to our gut. They dampen gut inflammation as well. So they inhibit inflammatory immune compounds. And in particular, they bind and activate T-regulation immune cells, which are part of our adaptive immune system to dampen inflammation. And there are a lot of immune activities, you know, as I said, around 80% of our immune system is in our gut. So this is really important. When things go wrong in our immunity there, when you have overactivity, we can start to get all sorts of health problems, sensitivities, and autoimmunity as well. And they may protect, there's some research suggesting that they may protect against things like colon cancer. They may lower adipose fat, so that dangerous fat that we get around our organs in our belly that is linked to things like heart disease. And they may improve insulin sensitivity. So increasingly we're learning about the role of our gut flora and inflammation there, and how they help protect against insulin sensitivity there. So low levels of short-chain fatty acids are linked with allergies, intestinal permeability and inflammation, things I've already mentioned, so basically the opposite of the benefits. So we can absorb butyrate from foods rather than relying on fibres. Cultured butter or cultured ghee, Jerusalem artichokes, unripe bananas, as I said, dandelion greens, which are an amazing food, and some kombucha, but it's more your homemade kind rather than your shop bought ones. So you can't necessarily rely on that, I guess is what I'm saying. You can also supplement, short chain fatty acids. Butyrate is particularly easy to find in supplement form, or as a practitioner anyway. But, you know, really our body has adapted with food. So we have adapted and evolved so that we use food to the maximum benefit. So if you're not eating properly and you're going to supplement, you can't out-supplement a bad diet, basically. So always food first. But then with some conditions, like somebody who's very immune depleted or has autoimmunity, or has some serious gut problems like autoimmune disease, like ulcerative colitis or IBD, it may be something that is worth supplementing for that. And it's always, as I said, it's become something that I utilize more in my practice. So postbiotics, just wanted to talk a little bit more about LPS. This too is a metabolite or byproduct created by bacteria when they digest prebiotics, along with like the short chain fatty acids. But this is extremely toxic, and as I said before, it's created by overgrowths of certain bacteria. And LPS impacts our brain function, brain health. As I said before, gut on fire equals brain on fire. And the symptoms that you might get with that, often people associate with them with aging. And as I said last time, they are not normal signs of aging, although they are common signs these days. Things like brain fog, depression, anxiety, memory loss, and irritability are signs that we may have inflammation in our brain, possibly caused by this LPS. The thing is, we do not have pain receptors in our gut. So something I often hear, I don't have digestive symptoms. My first response about that is then I go and ask him about details of certain things. Do you suffer from a bit of constipation or diarrhea, or do you have any bloating? And often people do, but they've got so used to it they may not recognize it. But the second thing is that you know, because we don't have pain receptors, we might not realize what's going on. It might be more systemic, the impact of that, and we won't necessarily relate back to our gut health. But the way that these issues can circulate from problems from our gut is through the bloodstream into the brain and other areas of our body. These are actual images of, and I wanted, while it's brain health is not the focus of this talk, I just wanted to show you because I think it's quite stark, the pictures of a healthy brain and an unhealthy brain. This comes from a website, from a book that I read, and this particular American or Canadian doctor, I can't remember, he really has a focus on brain health and does a lot, works a lot with gut health through this. And it is possible to reverse some of that. You often see before and after pictures in his book as well. So yeah, when you actually see this on a scan, it kind of brings it home, these holes in the brain, which are symptomatic of inflammation and poor brain health and poor overall health. Because as I said, we are interconnected. So probiotics, while most people know about probiotics, I wanted to put this second because largely it's sort of more medicinal than anything. So I think the food comes first. We create gut health through those short chain fatty acids, but then sometimes we might need to supplement with probiotic. So what is a probiotic? It is a living organism which, when administered in adequate amounts, confers a health benefit on the host. So probiotics are usually supplements. They're freeze-dried or they're live bacteria and yeast. But we have a long human history, possibly going back to as far as 5000 BC, of eating fermented foods. So it's something that we have traditionally done, and our health and our evolution this is a key part of it. So there are things like non-medicinal yogurt, and by non-medicinal I mean you can now get yogurt that has particular bacterial compounds or probiotics added to it. Kombucha, kimchi, kefir, natto, sauerkraut, tempeh, miso, they're all traditional fermented foods. But their potency varies very much dependent on the batch. And if you've ever made anything like your own yogurt or your own kombucha, you will know that it's dependent on what's in your environment to some extent. So common probiotic families, so we use when talking about microorganisms, talk about genuses, going down to species and strains, getting more and more specific. Common genuses or genii are Bifidobacterium, which most people have heard about, Bacillus, Saccharomyces, Enterococcus, Streptococcus, and they're all key ones that we find in our gut, bacteria that we find in our gut. So there are many, many species. And then underneath the species, we have strains. We also have soil-based probiotics these days, which is emerging, things like Megaspore Biotic, and there are a whole lot of other ones, Terraflora, all sorts of other ones coming up now. And there are many species of these too. The research, there's not a lot of research, but research is growing on their impact. And they survive the GI tract, whereas all probiotics don't necessarily do that. So traditionally recently, we've used probiotics for conditions like IBS, IBD, gut infections or overgrowths. or undergrowth to dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in the gut, constipation, lactose intolerant. That's an important one. I know someone who I've been recommending probiotics for who has a baby who is lactose intolerant and they are breastfeeding, so that can be important. Leaky gut, thrush, and during and post antibiotics if you need to take them. And newer uses that are being experimented with are blood sugar, vaginosis, immunity issues, SIBO, so that when we get that bacteria moving from the large intestine into the small intestine where it shouldn't be and causes havoc there, urinary tract infections, allergies, hay fever, and eczema. So how do probiotics work? And I know there are some people who don't believe in probiotics, and I'll talk about this in a minute. This is something that Peter raised with me, that a contact of his raised, a doctor that he knows. So they work by crowding out bad bacteria, or the overgrowths, because no bacteria is really bad. As I said, it only becomes a weed when there is imbalance, when there aren't enough healthy bacteria to keep it in check. So, and it also crowds out too many fungi. We also have fungi growing naturally, many different kinds in our gut, but when it becomes an overgrowth again, it becomes problematic. Probiotics inhibit or kill off bad bacteria and fungi via the production of antimicrobials. They bind to viruses, preventing or shortening gut viral infections. They inhibit pathogen gene expression. So when we have a bacteria or a virus or a parasite or something there that is not benefiting us, they can actually mute how they express themselves in our gut. They train and balance the immune system. They can reduce intestinal permeability and produce SIGA, which is something, an important immune component and something we need for a healthy gut and healthy digestion. They possibly modify allergens. They help produce those short-chain fatty acids that I was talking about before, and something called polyamines, so they're all beneficial for our gut. They can be anti-inflammatory and lower oxidative stress, so the stress that toxins have on our body. They can reduce our transit time, so for people with something like constipation, they can be helpful. And they can help us control our blood sugar and make us feel more satisfied as well. But the critical thing about probiotics is that they are strain specific, which means that often when we hear about probiotics or we pick them up from the chemists, they do not talk about the strains. But this is really critical because it's not the genus that gives us the information we need to decide whether it's going to be useful or not for a certain condition. It is the strain. So you can't just take any old probiotic, you can't just take bacillus and expect to help you with a certain condition that needs a certain strain of bacillus. And so it very much needs to be targeted. And when people say probiotics don't work, it could well be because they're not matching the right strain of probiotic to the condition. And you really do need a probiotic materia medica. So you really need to have that very specific information to be able to prescribe the right one for a certain condition. And I can't emphasize how important that is. When you see probiotics in the chemist, they often won't have that information. You can find that out, you can ring up the manufacturer, but if they don't give it away, you need to be very worried because you're probably wasting your money if you're buying it. So it's really important information to know. And why wouldn't you, if you're proud of your product, have that information on the bottle so that people can start to become more aware of what they're doing. There are a lot of claims about probiotics. I know that in America, research has been done and most of the over-counter probiotics are dead by the time you get them. especially the ones that are refrigerated. So, and beware of any claims, because there is no independent assessment in Australia of probiotics. So it's a multi-million billion dollar industry, the natural supplement industry, and those claims, the research shows that a lot of claims about what's in supplements generally, when they are tested, they cannot be validated. So in general, it's something to be aware of, but with probiotics in particular, you can actually make certain conditions worse by giving someone the wrong probiotic. If you give someone who has a yeast overgrowth in their gut causing bloating and maybe constipation, itchiness, skin conditions, and you give them something that is going to feed that yeast, then you can actually make their condition worse. You can exacerbate it. So it matters very much. Probiotics and dosing. So in general, once you've got the right strain for the condition, for an acute condition, you tend to have higher, more frequent doses. And I've had clients who've had gut tests done and they found that they have a nasty virus or nasty infection, and so we'll hit it with 2 specific kinds of probiotics to help them overcome that acute condition. But for chronic ongoing conditions, you tend to have lower but less frequent but ongoing dosages. So a few assumptions that can be wrong about probiotics. We assume that they all survive gastric juices, but many do not. So it's important to know which ones do or do not, so that you're not wasting your money or, you know, taking something that really isn't going to help. As I said, there are a lot of claims out there that cannot be substantiated or aren't checked necessarily. We believe that we can take antibiotics and just take some probiotics and it'll be fine. Not necessarily. Some people report that they never feel the same after taking antibiotics, and particularly if they have to have a triple therapy, for example, for H. pylori or something like that. And the research shows that sometimes people's guts can recover within 6 months, but often it takes up to 1.5 to 3 years. And as I said, some people never quite feel the same, and you do kill off certain strains and genuses. This is what's happening generally across the human population, across the world, particularly of those with poor diets and poor no contact with earth. Earth is one way we traditionally got a lot of, we benefit a lot from and got a lot of gut flora. As you probably heard, in Africa, when you compare the microbiota of some African tribes who live more traditionally, they have many more times diversity in different kinds of gut bacteria in their gut and better health because of it. So yeah, we have killed off whole genuses of gut flora with our modern lifestyle and diets, and they won't come back often. So and the other myth is that you cannot take probiotics. There's no point in taking them with antibiotics, but actually there is research to show that you can. But again, you've got to take the right one, and I use Materia Medica for that, and you can actually plug in a certain antibiotic and see which probiotic is going to be able to support somebody's gut flora and therefore general health and lower inflammation while they're trying to recover from something that the antibiotics are targeting. So actually it can be quite helpful. There are, here we are, sorry. The other assumptions that we can debunk here, some people think that you take a probiotic and it will have a lasting effect, as in 6 months' time, you've managed to improve one certain gut flora that you've been feeding with the probiotic. Some adhere, some are longish lasting, but others don't at all. So 2-3 weeks after stopping that probiotic, it will be gone. Other ones, like there's one that you can get for Escherichia, and that one tends to what we call stick. So that one tends to last a lot longer, but not forever. So as I said, not forever. Full colonization by a probiotic is pretty rare. as I said, Escherichia is one that tends to last longer and colonize better, but it doesn't happen very often. So they more or less have a more temporary effect on your gut flora, but nonetheless can be helpful. The evidence shows that if you take them with food and not on an empty stomach, they will be more supportive and grain-based or dairy-based. Now, a lot of people can't tolerate these foods, but if you can, that's what the evidence shows. But in any case, taking them with food is going to make their impact is going to improve the impact on your health. Food, also there's a belief that food cannot be as effective as supplements. While this is true for some foods that I mentioned before, because often we can't control the amount of healthy bacteria that are in there and healthy probiotics, then there are medicinal foods like Valia yogurt, all dairy-based, Activia and Yakult, but I don't like the levels of sugar in Yakult as a general comment. But they are medicinal in that they have certain probiotics put in them that can be beneficial for certain conditions. Yeah. So can they be harmful? Very rarely. I've read a paper that surveyed all the data about probiotics, all the research, and with severely immunocompromised, so people with very compromised immune systems need to avoid particular strains. And then very rarely also, there's an D-lactate, some can sort of support the production of that, and those people might be people who have a high fat intake in their diet. Sometimes with SIBO, you've got to be careful about the right kind of probiotic, particularly if it can cause brain fog or a damaged small intestine. So you really need to, with somebody who's really unwell, you really need to know these things about that person before prescribing certain probiotics or taking them. And then there are other thoughts about this as well. I was reading something by Dr. Zach Bush, who I respect very much. He was talking about a 2018 paper in the journal called Cell, which researched post-antibiotics to see if using prebiotics helped to recolonize the gut. And what this paper found was that by taking a monoculture, so one kind of probiotic, it freezes the recovery of the diversity. So you will recover in terms of that probiotic, but not necessarily in broader diversity. But my question on that, and it wasn't clear to me, was that person taking the right strain or strains for that particular antibiotic? So I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done on this. And certainly I'm not a researcher or expert, but it'll be interesting to watch what happens. So basically, probiotics can be therapeutic. They should not replace food first, but they can be useful for certain conditions if you use the appropriate strain. And there are a couple of examples here with gastroenteritis. Lactobacillus rhamnosus, which is a fairly common probiotic, helps, but only if you take the GG strain. If you take other strains, while they look good on the surface, in fact, they look stronger on the surface, but they will actually make things worse or not be useful. With IBS, Lactobacillus plantarum, and that particular strain 299V, it significantly decreased abdominal pain, the severity, the frequency of that pain, and bloating. But other strains, again, on the surface looked like they would be a better candidate for supporting someone with IBS, but they actually worsened the symptoms. So again, strains matter a lot. Harping back onto my favorite topic, food, but really, as Hippocrates said, food should be our medicine and our medicine should be our food. So always food first. You cannot out-supplement a poor diet. So food, of course, feeds our cells. It feeds our microbiome, which I've been talking about today. our microbiome is amazing. It adapts to our environment. So you can change the composition of your gut flora within 48 to 72 hours, for better or for worse. So if you have a bit of a junk food binge over a couple of days, your gut flora will change. And if you eat lots of veggies, because you've been on a junk food binge, then it will change for the better within 48 to 72 hours. And I was talking to someone about that yesterday, and they said that this was probably because back in the day when we were sort of Paleolithic type people, we ate largely, when we're hunters and gatherers, we mainly gathered, we hunted a bit. So when we hunted and we suddenly changed our diet for being protein rich, our gut flora had to adapt to that. So it is adaptable and it does change. So the message is, though, that it's never too late to improve your gut, the state of your gut flora through food and some of these things that I've been talking about, particularly if you target food. So as I said before, the greater your microbiome diversity, the better your health, and vice versa. And also, we know that now that by improving the diversity of our gut microbiome, it can improve our outcomes for certain treatments like chemotherapy. So, yeah, eat real food. What's real food? One ingredient, foods that are sourced as naturally as possible, without pesticides, grass-fed, wild-caught, and a big diversity of foods. Our gut loves plant-based foods, basically. Of course, we need other foods. We need good fats. Interestingly, our gut does need fats, particularly omega fats and omega-3s to thrive. Our gut flora need that. But, you know, of course, we need protein as well. They're the building blocks of our cells. But basically, eat a wide variety of plant foods is the message for your gut flora. And if you can't eat grains or legumes, which many of my clients can't when they're doing gut healing, but some people, on the other hand, need that because they're not very good with fats. So it's very bio-individual, but, you know, seeking to eat 40, sorry, not per day, that should be per week, 40 different varieties of plant-based foods a week. And you can do that easily by putting, you know, having some seeds on your salad, and then just mixing up your greens and having different starchy vegetables. And if you eat grains, having a bit of a variety, some rice, some quinoa, whatever it is you eat. And there is Dr. Karatzi, and he has a great he calls it the microbiome mashup. I think you might want to look that up, where he gets his patients who are really unwell to get a huge pile of vegetables, put them in a blender, and eat that throughout the day to feed the good bacteria in the gut. So it's so critical. He recognizes the importance of feeding those good short chain fatty acids and feeding the gut flora so that they will proliferate. As I said, good fats, we need the good fats to feed our microbiome too. And interestingly, too many saturated fats reduce the diversity of our gut flora. So not to say you shouldn't eat saturated fats, and short chain fatty acids themselves are saturated fats, but we need to have a balance. So it's all about balance. And that balance for everybody is individual. So getting to know your own body, of course, is, you know, not only empowering, but it's a critical part of your pathway to better health. And eating moderate amounts of protein. Yeah, so this is what I do. I target dysfunction at this kind of level using a whole of body and lifestyle approach and nutrients. I look at the diet. I look at someone's lifestyle, because stress in particular, lack of movement, which I know is a catch-22 when you have chronic illness, but lifestyle factors can be really important. Making sure that you're relaxed enough to begin that digestive process, chewing food, gastric juices, so that the juices in our stomach are the gateway into gut health, because that's where we start to break down our food. If we don't, we get dysfunction and damage all the way down into the small intestine and large intestine. So I look at what's happening in both of those areas, what's happening in our gut immunity, etc. And then we can have other factors that come into our gut health as well, like hormones, like environmental issues like mold or chemicals, and all sorts of other factors as well. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but yeah, what I do is I try and bring order to the chaotic state of poor health, creating a roadmap for every individual person. I do an in-depth health history. I do an online questionnaire, which is based on someone's signs and symptoms to identify systemic problems. So that will also print me out reports that are useful. Where is the dysfunction happening in the body? Is it in the large intestine? Is it in the stomach? Is it stress? Is it your blood sugar? Is it in the kidneys and the circulation? Is it in the immune system, etc.? And so this is how I target individual problems for people and then prioritize them. And then I offer lab testing as well. I also give people lots of support, which I find makes a big difference to success with clients, and particularly if you have to make change, because change can be challenging sometimes. But I really find that having somebody to be accountable and somebody to help you when you've gone 2 steps forward and 1 step back, particularly with chronic health journey, I know how discouraging this can be, and every time you have hope for something, and it works for about a minute and then you go backwards again. I know from personal experience and my clients' experience how frustrating that can be, but always looking for a way forward. I thought you might be interested in this, microbiome testing. So we've come a long way with this. We used to just culture stool samples, but now there's a genus level DNA testing called PCP testing, which is great, gives us a lot of results. But there is newer technology, and there's in America there's a company that does it there, and also one in Australia. Australian microbiologists from the start have developed this also DNA based but shotgun sampling. But this is much more specific. It looks at species in our gut. So it's really fascinating, because what it does is it provides you really targeted dietary and lifestyle advice on how to improve your health through targeting the building up certain bacteria and bringing down other ones that might be causing the inflammation and the harm to your body. So it's really quite powerful and amazing, because it puts the power back into you to know what you need to eat more of or less of in order to improve the state of your gut flora. And then, as I said before, it is more about balancing, we're thinking now, rather than killing off bacteria, because sometimes you can kill off good bacteria as well. But sometimes it's necessary to do that. You can do that naturally with herbs as well. Yeah, so all about the roadmap forward. I had a couple of questions that Peter sent me that I thought I would just mention. So enemas and colonics, do they impact the state of your gut flora? And they do. I know talking to but specialists, but anyway, I remember talking to one, and he said some people feel great after doing that complete clearance before they have medical procedure, and some people feel terrible. I suspect people who feel great might have had parasites and things that were bothering. People who feel terrible had a pretty good status of gut flora, and that's been disturbed. But what we do ourselves with enemas and colonics, they do change the nature of your gut flora, and they can have negative impacts. But then again, you've got to balance out the positives. So are you having a colonic because someone having it because they have chronic blockages that need to be cleared? Do they have mold, for example, where you need to pull out the mycotoxins from the body, and coffee enemas are critical for that. Coffee enemas also help with vagus nerve activation and activating the liver and gallbladder, and they can be really helpful with that. If you've got a really bad pH but nothing else is happening, colonics and enemas can help with that. So it's a matter of balancing that out. So it's very much individual and the need of that person and at that time. Fecal transplants, I am certainly not an expert at that, but I have heard a lot of people talking about it, you know, people who know about this stuff. And the research shows that, you know, they can be life-saving, they can be amazing, but I heard somebody talk about a clinic that was looking at when they worked and when they didn't work. Obviously, they checked the health of the microbiome of the donor, but there are certainly some super donors where the impact is a lot more successful than your average donor, for example. So that's what I have heard, but as I said, I'm certainly no expert in that. Leaky gut and SIBO. That small intestinal bacterial infection, and then leaky gut where you have the permeability, which can be in your small and large intestine, leading to foods and pathogens and nasty things, parasites, viruses getting through the gut that are into the bloodstream on the other side that aren't meant to be there. So probiotics can be therapeutic if used strategically to dampen the inflammation. And one of the benefits I talked about before of probiotics can be to heal the gut. But in general, biotics can help with building up the microbiome as well. But again, they have to be strain specific. So really knowing what you're doing rather than throwing things willy-nilly, or, you know, things that you might have read that aren't evidence-based is going to be important. So just finishing off, I love to talk about the power of food, and this is a really good example, especially in terms of building your gut microflora up and creating that balance, is that you are in charge of your own health. So there's a lot that you can do to improve the state of your health through taking control of your diet. So thank you.